Welcome back to the Manor, Entropians. Julian McBain here. And we are still on the trail of fighting Shoggoth, as I'm sure you're not surprised about at all. But what today's plan is expanding on the success of my video about getting your wallet right, the basic financial and education items. I'm going to expand upon what I talked about in that particular video. It actually got twice the number of views that my regular videos get, so it definitely did well. And I'm going to move into one of the specific aspects of it and drill down into detail. I'm going to do several videos like this to take each important point, drill down into it, and really get into the meat of it. And so for tonight, we're going to talk about the first major point I talked about, the pay yourself first aspect of it. And we're going to talk about building the savings habit. And this is the one that kind of baffles me the most about gamers, is they can save all the money they want in any video game and get there. Can't do it in real life. And there are some mundane reasons for this. And there are some not so mundane reasons for this. One, earning money in video games, with the exception of this video game, Entropia Universe, is relatively easy. And you can do it doing things that are a hell of a lot more fun than you can do in real life. Because last I checked, you can't just go out and shoot mobs all day and make money doing it. Although there are certain animals out there that you can hunt for cash in certain areas. It's not really a common practice anymore. But there are some not so mundane reasons either. And so we're going to get into the piece of it that you can control. And the part that you can control is building the actual habit. Because that's all it takes. It takes 21 days to form a habit. Or 21 iterations, I should say. It takes 21 iterations to build a habit. And you have to build the habit before it becomes something you just do. Because not all habits are bad. Some habits are good. Making your bed every day is a good habit to have. Right? Gorging yourself on potato chips every day is not such a good habit to have. So let's talk about building the savings habit and what you need to do in order to start doing these positive steps toward a good financial future. Or at least a stable one. Because you got to get stability first, right? So, the hardest thing to do out of all of this is to start. There's always an excuse to push it off till next week. And I'm going to quote every business guru ever and state that it will never be the perfect time to start. Ever. You just got to go out and start doing it. You have to be ready to fail. You have to be ready to step backward accidentally. You have to be ready to look at things and realize that it's not where you want it to be right now. But over everything else, the hardest thing to do is just to start. And here's the thing. Everyone thinks that if you're going to start a savings plan, you got to start with some ridiculous amount of money put away. Banks encourage it. There's a reason behind why they choose like $25 or $50 a month or something like that. It was an effort to make things work, but unfortunately, because they didn't put the message behind why they were doing it, it ended up causing more problems than it did actual good. Most banks don't do that anymore. But in the end, it doesn't matter how much you save in the beginning. It doesn't matter how much the amount is. What matters is that you do it, that you put the same amount away on regular intervals. And I would encourage you to do it weekly, especially when you start. Once you get it built up, if you want to do larger chunks monthly, or even do it by paycheck, right? $5 a week. It's only $260 a year. It's not a lot, but it's a start. And if you're on the broke list, where you don't have a lot of money to begin with, $5 a week can still be quite a bit of money. $260 in a savings account might save your ass one day. That's a whole year's worth. So you put the $5 in every single week. That's not even the cost of a meal at McDonald's. And yes, I know there are some people who can't even do that because they just don't make enough money. Try to figure it out. We're going to go into things like expenses and stuff like that later. I just want you to think about what you can try to do to start building this habit up. It doesn't mean you're going to implement it today. Just think about how you can do it. The $5 a week builds the habit. And that is the absolute hardest thing to do. You're just putting the money away, you don't touch it. There will be times when it's time to increase it. Let's talk about for a moment what those times are. When you get a raise. When you have a windfall. You might put a one-time savings increase in there. Put an extra $5 in. When if you have a second job. Put $5 from each paycheck in. And then over time, your $5 a week then becomes $10 a week. Then becomes $20 a week. Maybe at some point you're able to put $50 a week in. Not a lot of people can do that. I know I can't right now. But you could get there. I have been up to $25 a week in my life. It doesn't matter how fast it takes you get there. It doesn't matter how much you start with. What matters is that you make the attempt and that you're consistent. This builds the habit. This starts getting you used to having money put away. Because that's the hardest thing. Looking at your account and saying, oh, I have $10. Let's go to McDonald's. Is the easiest thing in the world to do. And you think I'm joking. You think I'm being facetious. This is not the case. Think about it. You come to the end of the week. You don't want to cook dinner. You've got $20 in your wallet. And you're just like, fuck it. I'm going to go out to eat today. And there goes there goes your little bit of extra. And no, you don't necessarily need to have that extra. Come on. There we go. But that little bit of extra with next week's little bit of extra, with the next week's little bit of extra, the next week's little bit of extra, time over time over time, iteratively could build up to something to where you'll have to worry about only having $20 a week much less often left at the end of the month. Okay, so you commit yourself to doing this. How do you do it? Well, there's a number of ways you can do it. The easiest way, the easiest way to set up and the easiest way to screw it up is to set up a savings account at your own bank and just automatically transfer it. And there's nothing wrong with doing that, but it gives you easy access to the money. So unless you're disciplined, it's really easy to backslide and just transfer it back to your checking account. I mean, unless they can isolate the account, which some banks have methods of doing it, you'd have to talk to your banker over that. The way you would want to do it is find a way to separate it from your current bank or from easy access to your checking account. One way to do it is to open an account in a different bank. It's a bit of a pain in the ass, but you can set up auto transfers between banks. In a lot of cases. Not always, but in a lot of cases. There are money transfer programs like Zelle. The other thing you could do is you could use any number of apps. And there are a bunch out there. I'm going to give 3. None of these are to be classified as an endorsement. You've got Long Game, you've got Stash, you've got Acorn. I know there are others. Those are the three that come readily to mind. I do use a couple of these for various things. All of them have their benefits and all of them have their drawbacks. And just so you're aware, both Stash and Acorn encourage you to invest your money in the market. This is not a video on doing investments. I am not a registered investment advisor. Do not consider this investment advice. But when they hold the money in cash before it's invested, it basically operates like a savings account. It doesn't mean it is a savings account. Please review those apps for their details and read all of the fine print. This video is not to be considered an endorsement nor a refutation of any of those apps. But the benefit to doing that is that to using things like those apps or having a separate bank is it makes it tough, not impossible, but a pain in the ass for you to move money back to your checking account. And oftentimes it takes several days, which means you're not just going to move it back for an instant gratification. If you're moving the money back, you have a purpose. And that purpose might be the reason you set up the savings account in the first place. So that is one of the most important things you can do, is separate it from your revolving account, your commonly used account. So, okay. You started building your savings habit. You've got a savings somewhere other than next to your checking account, or maybe even you're disciplined enough to have it in the same place. How do you expand upon this whole savings notion? Well, once you've got a balance, you've got a good habit going, you've got your one account with money in it. Now you can start thinking about making savings buckets or jars. Different groups use different names for it, but I call them buckets. So the buckets of money. So you've got one bucket of money that's just for emergencies. This is the first thing that you tap if something goes sideways. And you don't use it for frivolous shit. This is when, you're out you're driving around, you hit a pothole and the tire blows. That's what this bucket of money is for. Things that aren't covered by other important things like insurance. So you start setting up money buckets, and your first one is your emergency fund. And realistically, an emergency fund should have 6 months worth of money in it. Well, we all know that's not going to happen for a very long time. It may never happen. Realistically, once you have more than $1,000 in it, now you should start thinking about buckets. Still add to the emergency fund, but now you can start adding to other buckets. Because $1,000 is going to handle a lot of shit. Now, it's not going to handle a major medical emergency, but it's going to replace your tires if you need replacing to replace your tires. It's going to handle a deductible on your car insurance if you have, collision insurance and you hit somebody. It's going to cover, something breaking down, replacing your computer if you have a mid-range computer. It's going to handle a lot. It's not perfect. You want it to get bigger, but you've got the start. Okay, so now what do you do? Well, now create a second bucket, a different account, a different app, something. Some apps let you actually create different buckets within the app. Some banks let you do it within your savings account. So that the balance of the account's all there, but you've got marked and noted parsed funds within the account. Not many banks do it, but they are out there. Think of one thing that you want. Put the money in that bucket. Down payment on a car. The computer you really want. A new phone, which are as expensive as computers now because they are basically computers that fit in your goddamn pocket. The bucket for playing Entropia Universe. One of my buckets is set aside for Entropia Universe. I use it to do things like Mayhem. Well, not just Entropia Universe, but the channel in general. But most of my channel's Entropia Universe, so you know it's kind of a thing. So you have that bucket, and then you start to build that bucket up. And that bucket has to get its own dedicated deposit. So you're still putting money in, however much you put in for the emergency, but now you're slipping another $5 into this other bucket for something else. It could be an FU fund. It could be something that you're building up so you can invest in something, which will be a conversation later. We'll talk about investing and things of that nature in an informational way, because everyone's personal investing situation is different, and that discussion needs to be held individually with a professional. But you funnel the money aside and you have that bucket. And then if you come up with another thing you want to save for, you put another bucket aside and you put money into that one, and you never take away from the other ones. You're not splitting your deposits, you're adding deposits. If you can't add another deposit, you shouldn't open another bucket. So okay, you've got your buckets set up, and they're accepting money. And you're building this up. And one of the things you're going to think to yourself is, well, if I'm putting all this money in savings, why can't I just use it to pay off all of my debt? Which is a very valid question. And to a certain extent you're right, and to a certain extent you're wrong. On the surface, savings is actually more important than straight debt reduction. That does not mean that it's more important than debt maintenance. Always, always, always pay enough money to maintenance your debt. That means pay what you need to bring it down a little bit. Add extra to the principal. We're going to have a whole video or set of videos on debt reduction. But if the question is, can I put $5 more on that payment? Or put $5 in a savings, you put the $5 in savings. Because one of your buckets could be, when this bucket gets big enough to pay off a debt, I'll take all the money from there and dump it on it. And having that debt helps to build your credit. So from a constructive standpoint, savings is more important than debt reduction to a certain extent. That does not mean you don't balance it. And this is a very difficult conversation to have one-sided, but basically, you want to pay more than the minimums on all your debt. But you also want to make sure you're putting money aside for yourself. If the choice is between paying the minimums on your debt and putting $5 into a savings account, or paying the $5 extra on debt and not setting any money aside, the priority should always be setting the money aside. Now, if you don't have the money to set aside after paying the minimums on your debt, then that's different. I would never encourage you to ignore debt, because that's just plain stupid. But that's how important savings is if you have that extra $5 to start saving, you need to start saving. And that doesn't mean if you have 12 buckets, you should be, contributing to 12 different buckets and not paying the extra on your debt, because that's stupid too. There is a balance to be struck. But I wanted to impress upon you because a lot of people do just throw every penny they have on debt reduction. I used to do the same thing. No, I'm just going to dump all my money onto debt reduction and hope that I don't have something that makes me run up the credit card again. You see how dumb that is? That sets you further back. And so okay. That's a whole complex thing that we could get into, and I could have a whole video on that. And maybe I will some point. Maybe that one will actually have diagrams rather than being an Entropia universe. Eventually, I should probably put together a set of videos where I'm showing how all this works rather than hunting shoggoths. But you know what? I like hunting shoggoth, and people seem to like to listen to me when I'm hunting shoggoth. So that's what we're gonna do. last but not least, this is the most important thing to keep in mind. And this is something that a lot of people don't get. There's no magic bullet. There's no magic bullet putting your money together correctly. There's no instant fix. Don't rely on the lottery to get you there. 1, the lottery is bullshit. 2, it's really just a tax on you. And 3, you are much more likely to get struck by lightning twice than win. So fuck the lottery. Learn to manage your money correctly. This is step 1. No, I'm sorry. This is step 2. Step 1 is looking at yourself in the mirror and committing yourself to doing it. Step 2 is starting to build a savings habit. Because without this, you will always be spinning your wheels. Because you're not building the good habits. This is the first habit to build. Because once you build this habit, the other habits are easier. Because you can see the progress by watching your savings account tick up. It doesn't feel the same to watch debt go down as it does to watch your savings tick up. Trust me, it makes a difference. I never understood it until I figured this shit out. And that doesn't mean I'm, perfect at it. It doesn't mean I'm not still paying down debt. I am. I've been very open about that. But this makes a world of difference. So once you get this figured out, the next step is 10% easier. And as this gets bigger, the next step becomes a lot easier. Because you got to keep doing these steps week after week, month after month, year after year. This never ends. And what a lot of people don't understand is their financial health is as important as any other aspect of your health. Physical health, mental health, financial health. 3 most important things you need to think about. Because if 3 of them aren't taken care of, you aren't healthy. And this is step 1 to getting your financial health put together. All right, let's start heading back to forensics. I've ranted for long enough. Seriously, guys, this is shit they should be teaching in high school. And the schools assume your parents are going to teach it to you, but they don't know. They were never taught properly. Their parents set some money aside for a rainy day, but they knew that when they retired, they were going to have a pension. That shit don't exist anymore. You can't rely on that anymore. You can't rely on Social Security either if you're in America or whatever your government's version of it is. In the UK, they call it being a pensioner. But it's basically the same idea. You can't rely on that money anymore. You've got to rely on yourself. Realistically, that's the way it should have always been. Because there's no guile in relying on yourself. If you can rely on yourself, you don't need anyone else. That doesn't mean you don't want to be around other people or you're going to treat other people like crap. It means that when push comes to shove, you know you will make it. And by doing so, your family will make it, your kids will make it, your spouse will make it. Because you know what you're doing. And I'm sure if you're new to this channel, you have no fucking clue what's going on here. You're like, wait, I came here to watch Entropia Universe. What the hell? I'm getting money advice from a video gamer. Yeah, you're getting money advice from a video gamer who has done this shit for years. Okay, guys. I'm back at forensics. Well, pretty much back at forensics. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe down below. We are on the road to 13 million subscribers! one subscription at a time, so make sure you subscribe. Guys, as always, I really appreciate the support. Please consider becoming a patron by clicking the link in the description, patreon.com/JulianMcBain. You know what? If I make it to 10 patrons, I'm going to start a patrons-only society. If I make it to 10 patrons, I'm going to start a patrons-only society. Because then we'll have enough people to have a society. So please join me on this journey. And you all have a wonderful night.